Officer Miller smirked, his hand resting on his belt. He was enjoying the small crowd his confrontation was drawing. "This isn't a library," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to need you to move along." He was using his badge to harass Anya Freeman, a black woman who was just trying to enjoy her lunch break. It was a small, satisfying power trip for him. But here's what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know. The woman he was trying to intimidate, the problem he was trying to move along, spends her days turning ordinary men into elite Navy SEALs. He thought he was the predator. He was about to find out he was the prey. Hello and welcome back to Black Lives Story. What's the most arrogant abuse of power you've ever witnessed in public? Tell us your story in the comments below. And if you're ready to watch this officer get a lesson in humility, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Now, let's get back to the park, where Officer Miller is about to learn who he's really talking to.
The day was perfect. A high, cloudless sky arched over Crestwood Park, and the autumn sun cast a warm, golden light on the scene. It was a wealthy person's version of nature, manicured, orderly, and quiet. The only sounds were the distant, polite thwack of a tennis ball, the rustle of amber leaves, and the faint murmur of nannies pushing strollers along pristine cobblestone paths. It was a bubble of serene affluence, and at its center, Anya Freeman was enjoying a rare moment of peace. She sat on a heavy wrought iron bench, lost in a world of 19th century naval strategy. The book in her lap was a dense, academic hardcover, Sea Power and Strategy, The Principles of Naval Warfare. Her lunch break was a sacred, quiet hour, a time to decompress from a job that demanded everything from her, mentally and physically. She was a point of absolute stillness in the park's gentle motion, her face a mask of deep, intellectual focus. She was dressed in sharp, professional athletic wear, the kind that spoke of serious training, but to any casual observer, she was just a black woman reading a book. That was all Officer Miller saw. And in Crestwood Park, it was enough. He wasn't walking, he was strolling. A slow, deliberate swagger that rocked his shoulders and made his utility belt, laden with a holstered sidearm, taser, and handcuffs, creak with every step. He was a man who owned his beat, and he liked his beat to be clean. Miller was bored. The day was too quiet, his authority too unchallenged. And then he saw her. Anya Freeman didn't fit. His mind, a lazy filing cabinet of prejudices, scanned her and found no matching entry for this time, this place. A black woman, sitting alone, reading a book that looked too expensive. The equation in his head was simple and ugly. Out of place equals suspicious. Suspicious equals an opportunity. An opportunity to remind everyone who was in charge. Anya felt the shadow fall over her before she heard the footsteps. The sunlight on her page was suddenly blocked. She looked up slowly, her finger holding her place in the chapter. Officer Miller was looming over her. His hand was not on his gun, but on his belt, a casual, practiced gesture of intimidation. His expression was one of bland, almost bored superiority. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was not a question. It was a command, pitched just loud enough to make the couple on the next bench look up. This area is for residents.
You can't be loitering
here. Anya blinked, her mind still halfway across the Atlantic with the British fleet. "I'm not loitering, officer. I'm on my lunch break, reading my book." Her voice was low, steady, and clear. A voice of polite confusion. This response, devoid of the fear or immediate, fumbling compliance he expected, was like a small stone thrown at his ego. It annoyed him. He glanced at the book in her lap, his eyes narrowing in theatrical disbelief. "Reading, huh?" he sneered, and this time, his voice was louder, a performance for the people who were now openly staring. A woman pushing a stroller stopped. A pair of joggers slowed their pace. A small, captive audience was forming. "That's a pretty thick book," Miller continued, his tone dripping with a condescending faux admiration. "Lot of big words in there. You get that from the bookstore on Elm." Anya's calm began to turn cold. She knew this script. She had seen this play before. "Yes," she said simply, her eyes locking onto his. "That's funny," Miller said, taking a half-step closer, invading her space. Because the store manager just called in a report. Said a woman, fitting your description, walked out with a high-priced item she didn't pay for. And that, he said, tapping the cover of her book with a thick finger, looks like a high-priced item. A gasp came from someone in the crowd. A man in a business suit, sitting on a bench to their left, let out a small, contemptuous smirk. He was enjoying the show. Anya saw him, and her isolation felt complete. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "Are you accusing me of theft?" "I'm just doing my job, ma'am," Miller said, his smile widening. He loved this part. He was the law, and she was the suspect. The crowd's attention was a spotlight, and he was the star. He could see two, now three, smartphones pointed his way, their red recording lights like little glowing eyes. Perfect. Let them watch him handle this. "Now, why don't you make this easy on everyone," he said, his voice now a parody of patient authority. "Just show me the receipt for the book. And I'm going to need to see some ID, to make sure you don't have any outstanding warrants. People who loiter," he said, making air quotes with his fingers, "usually have a reason to." He had her. She was trapped. She could either comply and be humiliated, or refuse and be arrested. Either way, he won. The crowd watched, silent and expectant. He put his hand on his belt again, his thumb hooking near his cuffs. Officer Miller looked down at the woman who dared to read a book in his park, and he smiled, waiting for her to break. Anya Freeman did not flinch. She did not gasp or stammer or nervously reach for her bag. Instead, she did something that Officer Miller found infuriating. She held his gaze. She slowly closed her book, the sound of the heavy cover shutting seeming unnaturally loud in the tense silence. She placed it deliberately on the bench beside her. "Officer," she said, her voice still low and steady, a razor's edge of control. "I'm not going to show you a receipt for a book I've owned for 2 years. And I am not going to show you my ID, because I have done nothing to warrant this. I am sitting. I am reading. You are harassing me." This was not the script Officer Miller had in mind. He had run this play 100 times, and it always ended in fumbling, apologies, and the satisfying crunch of his own authority. He expected fear. He expected tears. He expected submission. Anya's calm, articulate refusal was a personal affront. He saw her composure not as the confidence of an innocent citizen, but as the calculated insolence of someone who thought they were better than him. In his world, her refusal to be intimidated was the ultimate act of defiance. The heat rose in his collar, his face flushing a dull, angry red. The veins in his neck pulsed. "Oh, a lawyer. Are we?" he spat, his voice losing its patient facade and taking on a sharp, dangerous edge. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, feel the cold, unblinking lenses of the smartphones. The smirks he had seen earlier were fading, replaced by looks of genuine curiosity. They were waiting to see what he would do. He couldn't back down now. "Think you're smart. Think you're better than me." He jabbed a finger at her. "You fit the description of a suspect in a theft. That gives me probable cause to identify you. And your refusal to comply," he shouted, his voice now a public proclamation, "is obstruction of an investigation." Anya stood up slowly, her 5'10" frame uncoiling with a fluid grace that seemed to unnerve him. She was not intimidated. She was assessing him. "Officer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you have no probable cause. You have a prejudice. And every person here is recording you." That was it. The word recording. The final, calm dismissal of his power. The last thread of his professional restraint snapped. His arrogance, publicly challenged by a woman he had already deemed worthless, boiled over into pure, unadulterated rage. "Probable cause," he yelled, the words now just a raw justification for the violation he was about to commit. He lunged, not at her, but at the simple canvas tote bag sitting on the bench. He grabbed it by the straps. "Do not touch my property," Anya commanded, her voice finally rising, but it was too late. In a single grotesque display of dominance, Officer Miller ripped the bag from the bench and, with a savage grunt, flipped it upside down. He shook it violently. Her belongings scattered across the dusty path in a pathetic, humiliating spray. A stainless steel water bottle clattered into the gutter. A set of keys, attached to a simple black lanyard, jangled loudly. A small, high-tech digital stopwatch. And her book, Sea Power and Strategy, fell face down with a dull thump, its spine cracking, its pages splayed open in the dirt. A collective, sharp gasp came from the crowd. This was no longer a misunderstanding, it was a public shaming. "Let's see what you're really up to," Miller sneered, the rage settling into a cold, triumphant cruelty. He felt he had won. He had broken her. He nudged the water bottle with the toe of his polished black boot. Then, with a contemptuous flick of his foot, he kicked the book, sending it skittering across the path, leaving a long, ugly scar of grime on its white cover. All this trouble, for a book you probably can't even read. He saw the last item lying in the dust, a small, black leather wallet. His victory was almost complete. "Now," he said, his voice a low growl as he bent to snatch it from the ground. "Let's finally find out who you really are." Officer Miller felt a surge of triumph. He had her. The crowd had seen her defy him, and they had seen him take control. This was how you handled people like them, with overwhelming, undeniable authority. He bent down, his knee joints cracking, and his fingers closed around the cheap, black leather wallet lying in the dust. This was the final piece, the checkmate. He fully expected to find an EBT card and no driver's license, or a fake ID from another state, or best of all, a name that would light up his system with priors. He was already rehearsing the click of his handcuffs and the satisfied, official tone he'd use. "You're coming with me." He flipped it open with a dismissive, theatrical flick of his thumb, holding it up for his own view, but keenly aware of the phone cameras recording just over his shoulder. He thumbed past a few credit cards, a $20 bill, and then he stopped. There was no driver's license in the main window. Instead, there was something else. Something sleek, black, and official. He pulled it out of its slot. The card was rigid, high-grade, and felt heavy in his hand. It wasn't the flimsy, colorful plastic of a state ID. His eyes immediately locked onto the emblem at the top. It wasn't the state seal. It was a massive, embossed golden eagle, sharp and regal, clutching an anchor and a shield. His brain, slow and sluggish, tried to process the words beneath it. United States Government, Department of the Navy. His blood ran cold. He did a physical double-take, his eyes darting from the card to the woman, then back to the card. This had to be a joke. A fake. He read the name printed in stark, bold, sans-serif font, Freeman, Anya C. He looked at the photo. It was her, a no-nonsense, official government portrait, her face clear of the calm contempt he saw now, replaced by a look of institutional seriousness. She was staring straight through the lens, humorless and severe. And then he read the title printed directly beneath her name. The smug, triumphant smirk on Officer Miller's face didn't just fade. It vanished instantly, as if it had been a mask that was suddenly ripped away. His face went pale, a sickly, blotchy white under his sun-pinked skin. The confidence that had puffed up his chest just seconds before evaporated like a phantom, leaving a hollowed-out, panicked shell. He stumbled back a half-step, a sudden, clumsy movement from his crouched position. The ID card felt like it was burning his fingers. His mouth fell open slightly, and a small, choked sound, a half-groan, half-gasp, escaped his throat. He looked up at Anya, who was still standing perfectly still. She hadn't moved a muscle. She just watched him, her expression unreadable, her eyes cold. She hadn't been defiant. She hadn't been disrespectful. She had been waiting. The shift in power was so sudden, so total, that the air in the park seemed to crackle with it. The crowd, which had been murmuring, fell completely silent. The man who had been smirking now had his phone held high, his expression one of sharp, intense confusion. They didn't know what Miller had seen, but they knew it was a smoking gun. They knew, in that instant, that this arrogant, swaggering cop had just stepped on a landmine. Miller stared at the card, then at Anya, then at the card again. The words on it swam before his eyes, each one a hammer blow against his fragile authority. Lead. Combat. Instructor. Naval. Special. Warfare. He was no longer a cop controlling a scene. He was a fool in a uniform, standing in a circle of witnesses, holding a grenade with the pin pulled. And the woman he had just harassed, the woman whose book he had kicked in the dirt, was the one who was about to let it go. Officer Miller was still frozen in that awkward, half-crouched position, his mind trying to reconcile the image of the woman before him with the words on the card he held. The gold eagle felt like it was searing his fingerprints. He was so caught in his own internal panic that he didn't even notice Anya Freeman begin to rise. She didn't just stand up, she ascended. It was a slow, deliberate uncoiling of pure, contained power. Her posture shifted, her spine straightening into a rod of forged steel. The casual, relaxed woman who was reading a book just moments ago was gone, replaced by a presence that instantly dominated the space. When she spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. The polite, low tone was gone, stripped away to reveal a hard, cold, and commanding instrument of authority. It was a voice that didn't just speak, it cut. It was a voice that expected and received immediate, unquestioning obedience. "That is United States government property, officer," she said, her words slicing through the park's silence. She took one slow, deliberate step toward him. "You have illegally seized it, and you have contaminated a potential chain of evidence." Miller flinched as if she had struck him. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "I suggest," Anya continued, her voice dropping even lower, "that you place it in my hand. Now." She didn't ask. She didn't request. She gave an order. And Miller, a man who had built his career on issuing commands, now found himself on the receiving end. His body, trained for years to respond to a superior officer, reacted before his brain could. His arm extended, his hand trembling, offering the ID back to her. It was a gesture of total surrender. Anya took the card, not snatching it, but retrieving it with a smooth, authoritative motion. She didn't put it away. Instead, she held it up, angling it so the sun glinted off the golden seal, just inches from Miller's face. "You wanted to know who I am, officer," she said, her voice sharp and clear, projecting for the entire, silent crowd to hear. "My name is Anya Freeman. I am the lead combat instructor for the Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School." She let the title hang in the air for a beat, watching Miller's face crumple in confusion. He didn't understand the words. She decided to translate. "In civilian terms, officer," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "I train your country's Navy SEALs. The men you see in movies? I am the woman who decides if they are good enough. I am the one who teaches them about controlled aggression, about tactical patience, and about the critical difference between authority and power. A lesson," she added, her eyes narrowing, "that you clearly never learned." A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God." The man who had been smirking now had his phone up, his face a mask of shocked delight. Every single phone was now pointed directly at Officer Miller. He had wanted an audience for his power trip, and now he had one for his disintegration. He looked like a deer in headlights, his face slick with a sudden cold sweat. He tried to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound came from his throat. His authority, his arrogance, his entire sense of self had been publicly and professionally annihilated in less than 30 seconds. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey, trapped in a cage of his own making, surrounded by silent, judging faces. The crowd's energy had flipped. The passive onlookers were gone, replaced by a jury. The smirks and whispers of mockery that had been aimed at Anya were now replaced with open looks of shock and disdain, all directed at the uniformed man who now looked small, pathetic, and hopelessly out of his depth. He had used his badge to harass a civilian, and that civilian had just revealed a badge of her own, one that, in the world of pure authority, dwarfed his pathetic park bench kingdom. The park was utterly silent. The only sound was the distant city traffic, a world away from the frozen, superheated bubble of tension around Officer Miller. He was a statue of pure humiliation, his face a grotesque mask of panic and disbelief. The smartphones of the crowd were a ring of unblinking, digital eyes, all pointed at him, all recording. Anya Freeman didn't move for a long moment, letting him soak in the suffocating judgment of the crowd. Then, she took a single, deliberate step, not toward him, but toward her belongings, still scattered in the dust like garbage. She bent down, her movements fluid and controlled, and picked up the book. Sea Power and Strategy. A long, ugly scar of grime from Miller's boot was smeared across the cover. She held it, her expression unreadable, and calmly, methodically, dusted it off with the palm of her hand. Every person there, including Miller, watched this simple, quiet act. It felt deafening. She turned her gaze back to the officer, who flinched, his eyes darting to the book as if it were a weapon. "You see this book, officer?" Her voice was low, devastating, and carried to every phone camera. "You called it stolen. You kicked it in the dirt. You assumed I couldn't even read it." She held it up, the title facing him. "This is Sea Power and Strategy. It is required reading for the advanced tactical commanders your own police department sends to my base at the Naval Special Warfare Center. I teach the course." She let the words sink in, a poison seeping into his system. "The ones who actually want to be protectors," she continued, her voice sharp. "The ones who want to learn the difference between a real threat and a citizen on their lunch break. They come to me. They read this book. And they pass. They are the ones who earn the right to wear a uniform, to protect and serve. They are not bullies." She dropped the book into her tote bag, the thud landing with a sense of finality. Miller was visibly trembling now, his authority not just gone, but inverted. He was the suspect. He was the problem. Anya zipped the bag partway, then took one last step toward him. Miller instinctively recoiled. She was in his personal space now, and she owned it. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze so cold and powerful it seemed to hold him in place. Her voice dropped to an intense, clear whisper that, in the dead silence, was as loud as a scream. "You wear a badge that gives you authority," she said, the word hitting him like a physical slap. "I," she said, tapping her own chest lightly, "am the authority. You're going to want to remember the difference." It was over. She didn't wait for a response, for an apology, for a single stammered word. She turned her back on him, a gesture of complete and total dismissal. With a dignity that shamed everyone who had snickered just minutes before, Anya Freeman calmly bent and retrieved her other items. The clink of her keys as she picked them up, the thud of the steel water bottle, the small, digital stopwatch. She placed each one in her bag, a methodical, unhurried retrieval of her dignity. Each second she spent gathering her things was another second of agonizing, silent humiliation for Officer Miller. When she was done, she zipped the bag fully, slung the strap over her shoulder, and with her head held high, began to walk away. And then a remarkable thing happened. The crowd, which had formed a circle of judgment around Miller, now formed a corridor of respect for her. As one, they stepped back, parting for her like water. They didn't speak. They just watched. As she passed the young man who had been filming, he lowered his phone and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Damn. He just got dismissed." Anya Freeman never looked back. She just kept walking, her posture perfect, her steps even, until she disappeared around the park's cobblestone path. The final shot was of Officer Miller. The hero was gone. The crowd, their purpose served, began to disperse, talking in low, excited murmurs. Miller was left utterly alone in the middle of the path, a small, sweaty, defeated man in a uniform he had disgraced, standing in a circle of his own shame. His power, his arrogance, and his career were shattered in the dust, right next to the boot-shaped scar he had left on the ground. One person's courage can bring a bully's world crashing down. If you believe that true authority is earned, not just worn, show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Black Lives Story for more powerful stories of justice and empowerment.